Hello, this is a presentation that I gave at my institution to help students use outside sources. So just a little bit about me. At my institution at Pittsburgh State University in Pittsburgh, Kansas, I'm an associate professor of English, but I also direct the writing across the curriculum program. And what I do here is I help help faculty, integrate writing in their writing to learn courses and also help them create assignments and assessments. But another thing that I do is I give presentations like this one that you're watching. So in this workshop or this session, I'm going to talk about just some challenges students face in using source materials and challenges instructors have in teaching source integration. We're going to talk about what synthesis is, and then we're going to identify some strategies for helping students synthesize sources in the classroom. And you will leave this with a resource, and I will also link that resource to the YouTube description of the video. So when students are using outside source materials, there's a number of challenges they face. And as you think about this or reflect on this, you can think of some challenges you've seen. When I met with faculty to talk about this issue, they shared things like students not finding the best sources, like they weren't peer reviewed, or students just like quoting from the start of something, like not having read the whole thing. And one thing that we have to remember is that academic English is nobody's first language. Students sometimes never have done this before, or they're writing about a topic that they may not be interested in, and so it's hard for them to have that motivation for whatever reason. And just like some of the moves we make in academic writing can feel very foreign. And so I'm going to talk to you about that today. But I think when it comes to teaching students, I think instructors also face some challenges themselves. And so I listed some for the instructors, but they also shared some of their own challenges that they found. But one thing to remember is that we're not all trained as writing teachers. My field is rhetoric and composition, or writing studies, and it is a field. I'm trained in ways of teaching writing. Sometimes people who teach writing are not trained in this, and so they don't know all the strategies or pedagogical moves they could make to help guide students. And also, I think as writers, we all have struggled with the writing process at different times. And so sometimes we know that we're not the greatest at doing something, but we have to teach it anyway, and that can be hard. At my institution, we have writing to learn courses that are also courses in people's majors or in our general education curriculum. And so sometimes it's hard to balance writing instruction with that course content. That's certainly a challenge that I see at my institution. So when I presented this to other faculty, I wanted them to understand what synthesis is. That's something that we talk about in writing studies, but you also talk about it in other fields and just generally too. So broadly defined, synthesis is a combination of ideas to form a system. Very simple definition that I got from Google. In writing studies, we talk about synthesis as using source material from two or more sources to back up a particular claim to support an argument or expand on a topic. So for example, I'm sure if you're a writing instructor or if you're a student, you've written a paper like this, or you've seen a paper like this if you're an instructor, where it's one paragraph and a citation at the end, and another paragraph and a citation at the end. We want students to integrate sources, different sources, to kind of support one claim. So instead of just like using one source to support a claim, we want them to use more than one. And so that's what synthesis is. So when I approach this in the classroom, I want to get students to understand that all academic writing is a conversation they are entering. So in my field, we have the concept of the Burkean parlor, which I just call a room, right? You've entered a room and there's a conversation happening and you've just entered the room. So you don't know the conversation yet. You have to sit down, you have to listen. And after listening and thinking about what's being said, you can probably contribute. Academic writing is very similar to that. So that gives us to the first thing I'm asking students to do. For this activity that I want you to help students understand how to synthesize material, they first have to read sources. on a topic. And by the way, I call these activities and not steps because I want you to understand that all these activities or steps have active engagement to them. And so before I have them read, I just talk about some active reading strategies, you know, how I highlight and make margin notes. I talk about paraphrasing and summarizing strategies. But one of the things that I do to kind of do a reading check or make sure students are reading sources and writing about them is that I have them fill out a source chart. And I will link to this in the YouTube video, but or in the description of the YouTube video, I should be clear. I will link to that there. But what that source chart asks them to do is just pull out some quotes from the source chart, but also do some paraphrasing, share some paraphrasing from it and some summarizing. So that's why I talk about paraphrasing and summarizing first, especially in my lower level writing courses, so that they know how to do that for filling out the source chart. I typically ask them for 3 to 4 sources to fill out, but they should at least have 2. So my strategy for them is to ask for more than what I would like to see, because usually I will see at least 2 if I ask for more. And then along with that, I also ask them to think about how their different sources are in conversation. I encourage them to fill that out in the source chart near the bottom where it's located if they want to, but they also can do that later with the other activity that I'll talk about. So I'm also inserting some resource notes in case you as the instructor are deciding to use, you know, various resources you have available to help students have some supplementary instruction on this topic. And so I thought a librarian visit to go help them understand how to do research, to even a writing center visit if your campus has this ability where somebody from the writing center can come in and give like a short little talk or activity around a writing strategy. So next, after students fill out the source chart, and I'll be honest, I usually give them about a week or so, I have them working with a partner. And it's ideal if there's a partner because this seems to work best if it's a two-way conversation. So they have a partner and they just kind of share information from their source chart. They just kind of talk about their sources, what their sources shared, what they were about. And then they start to talk about them as having a conversation with each other. So I'll have the partner ask the person talking about their sources, so do you see a conversation happening between these sources? Where is it? Are they agreeing? Are they disagreeing? Where are they in some kind of conversation? And so I usually, after this session, you know, check in with them, ask how it went. And then I ask them to fill in some of those pieces of the source chart if they haven't yet, where those sources are in conversation. And I just ask them, you know, to try to write something about that. Even if it's outside the source chart, it can be inside, and just bring it to the next class session with them. So resource note, there's a lot of online writing labs that can be helpful. OWL at Purdue is a big one. And again, in the YouTube description of this video, I will share a link to the source chart and the activity I'm going over to as a lesson plan. So next, after students read some sources and after they think about the sources in conversation, you have to help them kind of draft the argument or do some activities to help them do this. And again, I have them work in partners. And again, it could be the same partner, it could be a different person, or you could even have a group of 3 if you need to. And they share whatever they have at this point, like whatever they've written. Sometimes you will have people who just filled out their source chart completely, and that's fine. But you want them to kind of see or recognize what the main point or main argument is that is emerging from the sources they have read. And from that, can they start to construct a drafted thesis statement? Like, can they think of an arguable statement they could make around those sources? So you have students talk about this in groups or with a partner. And then as a homework assignment, you know, I do a check-in at the end of class and just encourage them to draft a thesis statement for their paper with an introduction that frames the thesis. So it doesn't have to be long. It could be something like 5 sentences or even 3 sentences, but something that can kind of integrate that thesis into some kind of introduction. And I also encourage them to, if it's helpful, to keep using the source chart and encourage those active reading strategies. So again, if you wanted to add some extra resources, you can see if your writing center at your institution could visit to talk about thesis statements. You could use All at Purdue. I love YouTube videos. And so sometimes I'll share just a YouTube video about this topic. And that way I don't have to do all the talking and lecturing, and a YouTube video can do a little bit of that. Finally, you want to have them start working in more sources as they're working on their paper. So at this point, I've tried to encourage students to at least have some kind of introduction to their paper with a thesis statement. And I have them bring it to class, and I have them again pair up and look at these and talk about them. And I have some prompts here, like they can talk about what is clear about the thesis, what is not so clear. Does the thesis statement present an argument, something that's arguable? If you don't want to do this, like if you're like, oh, I'm just going to give students a couple of weeks to write, don't really want to do anything like that in my classroom, have them look at examples of good student essays and talk about them. Have them see how they're integrating sources, have them see how they're supporting claims. This can be sometimes just as good as have them talk about their own writing. Though personally, as a writing instructor, I feel like talking about your own writing and doing it is very valuable, but also seeing examples of good writing is valuable too. And so if you notice students are kind of disconnecting or struggling, this might be a good opportunity to do that. And what I do at this point is I just give them time to write. Try to have them develop claims and arguments in their paper using their sources. Again, could be a great time for a writing center visit, or just giving students time to write. Sometimes I even cancel class and just give them a work day, and that can be very valuable. So I'm not bringing you to the very end of the whatever assignment you would be teaching, but I wanted to give you some teacher tips as you move students along in ways you can support them in their writing. One is I do writing conferences, and I also do labor-based grading or grading contracts. And so these writing conferences also become points where we can talk about the student's progress. But you can also just have a writing conference where you cancel a day of class and they bring a draft that they have and you can talk about it. I recommend you canceling class for writing conferences because it's really too much work to ask of anybody to teach class and then also do writing conferences, especially if you're teaching in higher ed and they don't have a lot of extra time. And so having them use that time that they would be in class for a writing conference can work really, really well. And yes, sometimes you do have to schedule time outside of your typical class meeting. But these can be beneficial if you have the time and can do it. If you cannot do writing conferences and cancel class, you can do peer review. One pro tip I have is I do a practice peer review, so that students just don't comment on editing mistakes that they see or grammar errors. I want them to understand ways of giving feedback that helps students develop a paper more. And so I usually spend a whole class day just practicing, especially for lower level writing courses. With the upper division, you don't sometimes have to do this as much, but it can still be helpful. And just bring in a student sample from like another class or something you find online. There's lots of student sample essays out there, and just have students talk about it in terms of giving some feedback on that paper. And of course, I've talked about this already, but it's always nice to give students a work day. So if you just want to give them time to write, if you see people falling behind and it seems like, you know, more than half that class needs a little more time, give them a work day. And that also gives you some time to kind of plan your next lesson, to do other things that all of us teachers are very busy doing. I will also remember to link this sample student paper if you would like it, if you would like to use it. But again, you can find a lot online. And sometimes I use feedback artifacts if I do something like peer review in class. So if I have them do peer review, I might set up a Google, or not a Google survey, but a Canvas survey or some other kind of survey where they can just share what was some feedback they got on their writing, what was one good thing that was shared about their writing or more than one, and how they plan to move forward based on the feedback. Very simple questions that kind of see how things are going. But the ultimate end goal of this is helping students understand that academic writing is an ongoing conversation. They have to understand the conversation before they can actually write around it. All right, and I will share these links in the YouTube video description, but I really hope you found this useful to you, and thank you for listening.